My name is Ken Holder. I was born near a town in the Texas Panhandle, born between the towns of McLean and Shamrock, which probably isn't familiar to very many people. It's east of Amarillo, about 70, 80 miles. When I was 4 years old, we moved into Amarillo, and I lived there until I left for college. And I can think of any number of things about being in that place at that time that have affected and influenced almost everything I've done artistically, I think. Part of it was just a kind of an attachment to the land. You may think that's funny if you've ever been to the Texas Panhandle, and it's flat and dusty and tumbleweeds and not a whole lot to see, generally speaking. But as the editor of the Amarillo newspaper wrote sometime not long after I had moved there with my parents, there's a story about God creating the world in 7 days. And he worked the first 6 days and got tired, and he decided, well, I'm almost done. There's that little piece down there in that southern part of the globe that isn't finished yet. It's just clay and stuff. I'll just smooth it over. And tomorrow when I get up, I'll make it valleys and mountains and streams and like the rest of the world, make it beautiful. And next day he got up and he looked at it, and the clay had just turned to hard rock, cliche. He looked at it and started to work out. He said, "This is too hard." He said, "I'll just make people that like it this way," which is kind of true. Part of my proof of that is that there was an air base in Amarillo years ago when I was growing up through junior high school and high school, and most of the military personnel that were there, stationed there, were from the Northeast. I don't know why there were a lot of New Jersey people for some reason, but it was amazing how many of them got down there and spent 2 or 3 years living there, and got out of the Air Force and just stayed because they liked it. And so there's something about the I don't know, the sky and the air and just the atmosphere that I always felt really attached to the earth. And part of it had to do with the breaks that we got away from it, going up into New Mexico and the mountains, or to Colorado. And I was in awe of that landscape then, in contrast. And so when we would go, I would pay particular attention to the landscape. I'd make sketchbooks and carry them along with me. And as we drove in the car, I would make drawings. And then when we got into camp at night, I would color them in with my colored pencils. And there was, just 20 miles from Amarillo, there's a canyon, small canyon. Well, I wouldn't say a really small canyon. It's 5 miles wide and about 30, 40 miles long, I guess. It's a state park now. And down there, they refer to it as the Little Grand Canyon. And that was one of my favorite hangouts as a kid. As a family, we would go down there to picnic or camp or whatever, and that was a place of mystery to me, because it was a place where it was just kind of wide open, and you could roam trails down there, and you could see all kinds of wildlife. And I remember seeing right in the middle of a stream one time a couple of bulls fighting a typical battle head to head, trying to run the other one off from the herd that was down in there. Somebody's cattle anyway. Stuff like that, and wild birds and all kinds of other stuff. And that was a favorite place, and that place particularly had influence on me, I think, in terms of kind of an attachment to the land. But it was always, somehow it was always about the land. Relatives of mine had ranches down there, and or farms, I should say, and I would go and work in the summers on the farm. And my grandmother lived back where I was born, and every summer I would go back and spend 2 or 3 weeks with her, just the two of us alone out in the country, and we'd walk a lot and explore a lot there. And so it was, the landscape itself, I'd have to say, is good or bad. I think it's had some direct influence on who I am and what I do. One other particular thing I would mention is Amarillo was the place where George O'Keeffe went when she was shortly out of college. She was living in North Carolina, I think it was. And Amarillo Public Schools wanted to set up an art program in their schools. And they looked around and somehow they found her and hired her to come to Texas, which was her first trip out to the Southwest. And she served for a couple of years as the superintendent of art and the first art teacher in the public schools in Amarillo. And some people, when I tell this story, they think, oh, you were one of her students. I'm not quite that old, but I was influenced by that just because we did have an outstanding art program that the town was proud of, the school system was really proud of. And I'm sure I never had a single art teacher growing up through the public schools there that didn't lecture all of the students about George O'Keeffe and how important she was and what an influence she had on the Amarillo art scene. And
okay.
And so I'm sure that had a lot to do with influencing me to become an artist. It wasn't really the beginning, but all through the school system, it was provided an impetus and encouragement and support for what I was doing. I told the story, I keep saying this is the last time I'm going to tell this story, but when I was 4 years old, someone gave me a Gene Autry, King of the Cowboys, paper doll book. And this is when we still lived in the country before we moved into Amarillo. I was 4. And I played with it until it had a horse and Gene Autry and all kinds of clothes and stuff to put on. Anyway, I played with it until I tore the legs and tail off of the horse. And I was distressed about that because I played with it so much. And shortly after, we had moved to Amarillo by that time. And I remember being distressed about it. And my father who's not artistically skilled at all, had no talent of any measure, took a piece of cardboard, I think, from a tablet, writing tablet back. And he took the horse remains that I had traced around it and then added some legs to it that were acceptable and cut it out for me, so I had a brand new horse to play with. And I thought that was magic. And I don't know how many times he had to do that to keep me supplied, but he did it several times. And then one day he wasn't there, and when I seemed to need it very badly, and I had watched him enough that I thought, oh, I can do that. And so I found some cardboard and traced my horse and cut it out, and I realized that I had incredible power that I hadn't had before. It was like suddenly finding out that you got magnetic vision, or what is it Superman has? You can see through everything.
Yeah, X-ray vision.
X-ray vision,
Yeah.
I'm trying to say. And so then ultimately I began to draw a lot of horses, and I realized I wasn't just stuck to one. I could have as many as I wanted. And I drove for myself and my younger brothers and sister. And by the time I started school in the first grade, I was already adept at least doing that, at least drawing horses. And you get into school and you get funneled or you get channeled according to what you do. And if you impress your friends and teachers at school that you can do something they can't do, or you can do something like that, they encourage you to make more and encourage you to make art. And I got funneled, I guess, directly into thinking like of being an artist and beginning to look at art, pay attention to art, and be more interested in it. A negative aspect to that is there's not a whole lot of art in West Texas to look at least there wasn't in those days, in the 40s and 50s. I never was in an art museum until I was well into college. Never really went into a serious art museum until I got out of college and got in the Army and ended up in Europe and spent 3 years in Europe where I got to travel a lot and visit most of the major museums in Europe and got my real education. I got to see all of the real things that I'd studied in art history in college. And all along, I was looking forward to getting out of the Army and returning and going to graduate school somewhere and pursuing a career in that. I'd kind of realized when I got out of undergraduate that making a living as an artist wasn't a really very easy thing to do, and not very many people did it, especially in those days. And that I'd have to do something practical to satisfy my family, who was helping me get through school. And so while I was in an undergraduate school, I came to recognize that there were options besides commercial art, which is where I'd started. And a little experience in commercial art, and I quickly discovered I didn't want to do that. That wasn't art that I understood. And I had a little experience in an advertising agency in Fort Worth, and they were going to take me on as an intern when I first began my freshman year at TCU. And after about a month or two, they called me and said, "Look, we don't have time to do what we thought we were going to do, and we can't afford to keep paying you what we're paying you. So you go into school, get your degree, and come back later." And in that process, I'd learned enough to know that that wasn't what I wanted to do anyway.
I'm going to pause this. What did your folks do professionally, and how did they feel about you pursuing an art degree?
Yeah. That's a very, very positive thing, is that my parents all along really supported it, because it was something that they recognized was unusual, and that I was succeeding at it and getting a lot of positive attention, feedback from friends in school and stuff. My father was just a working guy. He only had an 8th grade education. He'd gotten married not too long before the Second World War started. We were in Amarillo by then. He had 3 sons and a daughter, and was not really liable to the draft. So he had worked as a farmer up until the time we moved into Amarillo. When we got there, he just took working jobs. He ended up working in a smelter for the war effort for 3 or 4 years. When that waned, he began working in a service station back in days when service stations were service stations. And worked there until the guy who owned the service station retired and offered to sell him and another guy the station. Neither one of them could have bought it by themselves, but he was encouraging them to join his partners and buy it. And my dad demurred. He didn't want to be a partner with anybody. He felt like that he didn't know enough to hold up his end of the deal. And along the way, he made friends with a pest control company owner, and the guy hired him. He used to say my father was a hired gun and a killer. and it was always a good joke. Nobody ever believed me, but I wrote a song once after we were here in Bloomington. My wife worked at a bank, and my oldest brother worked for a petroleum company. I said, I can't remember exactly how it went, but something like, my wife is in banking, my brother's in oil, my father's a killer for hire. I don't remember where the rest of the song went. My mother grew up in the town of McLean, which is near where I was born, which is, I guess, why my father ended up there. She'd gone to school. She had one semester of college before, I think before the Depression came along and kind of ended that route for her. She was a very talented person. She was basically just a housewife, but she had all kinds of skills that had to do with what in those days we might call women's art, sewing and embroidering and quilting and you name it. She could do all of those things. She'd grown up doing those things, working in groups with other women and girls making stuff, and she had a good sense of taste and a really good eye and a lot of skill. And I think that had a lot of influence on me as well in terms of quality concerns and so on, and respecting things of beauty and purpose and function. They were all very supportive, though, because, as I said, they appreciated the options I had. They were, like most parents, I think they were concerned when I got ready to go pursue it that it wasn't something that was going to pay. They were, how are you going to make a living? Kind of questions that were always there. But they never gave up on that. They continued to encourage me and support me. When I got in, I know when I went to TCU for my undergraduate studies, I got an entry because of one of my high school teachers who had been a graduate there, and he had gotten me in school and taken me down and through the fine arts department had gotten me an assistantship through the dean, who was a personal friend of his. And I went down there and accepted it, and they'd run out of assistantships in art, so they gave me an assistantship in theater, and I was working backstage, doing sets and stuff, or learning to do it. And the first month it came, and I didn't get a paycheck. They said, "Oh, you put your pay towards your tuition," which I still owed on. And my parents, although they didn't, I don't know where they got the money, but somehow they came up with the money. My dad was very principled about that. He said if a man works, he ought to get paid for it. And so they came up with the money to pay off my tuition so I could go ahead and finish school. And that became, that was really a significant thing for me, because I knew, I don't know where, I'll never know, I guess, where they came up with the money to do that with, but somehow they did, and we got through the first year. So they were always there in great support and encouraged everything I did. And not that they weren't baffled sometimes, especially when I got into graduate school and my work began to become a little more unusual or a little extreme or radical or whatever. And they weren't really quite sure what they had paid for or what I was doing and why I was doing it. But they never lost faith, I think.
Go ahead.
I forgot from the beginning, I didn't finish my thought about my father, who took a job as a hired hand in a large pest control company in Amarillo, and worked at that for a number of years, to the point that most of his customers thought he was the owner because he was the only guy they ever saw. And at some point he got to the point where he felt like he wasn't really totally appreciated, and he tried to get a raise, significant raise from his boss, and the boss just turned him down, said he couldn't do it, and so he quit. And his boss told him, he says, well, we signed a contract that you couldn't go into business against me for 6 months after leaving. And my dad said, and he says, but he told my dad, he said, but I realized I could never hold you to that. You can't stop a man from making a living. And my dad said, no, I'm going to stick to it. And so for 6 months, he didn't work as a pest control guy, and he got odd jobs, driving a truck here or there, whatnot, picked up a little money to live on. And when 6 months was up, he went back around to all his old customers, and he said, I'm in business for myself now, and just want you to know. And they said, what? What did you? We always thought you were the owner. We wonder where you've been. And so he ended up being a very successful businessman. He had demurred all along because he didn't think he knew enough or was smart enough, had no business knowledge or anything, but he turned out to have a really successful company and almost put the other guy out of business, I think. And so,
Nice.
yeah, it was. I thought it was a nice success story, to do what he did with his education, and still had lots of friends and didn't make a lot of enemies in the process.
Nice. My grand. So after you were in the military, you went to graduate school in Chicago.
Right,
Right.
the Art Institute.
So tell me about that adventure.
Well, when I came back from Germany, I got out of the Army and I spent the summer at my parents' house. I contacted some of my old university professors at TCU and asked their advice about graduate schools, and they gave me some, A+ and C+ and a few in between options to pursue. And I applied to 4 or 5 universities. I got rejected from nearly all of them because I was way over my head, having not made any art for 4 years. And you know how it is with graduate school, they want to know what you've been doing and what you can do. And I really didn't know what I could do because I hadn't ever pushed anything to that point. So I wasn't surprised, but the Art Institute at that time was not in very good shape financially, and I think they were taking just anybody that applied. And so they even let me in. And I got up there, and the 2 years that I was there, the school was kind of, it was kind of a disaster. You wouldn't know it with the reputation they had before and the reputation they have now. But at the time, they were in really sad shape. It had started as a school, and one outgrowth of the school was the museum. Well, by this time, the museum had gotten so large and so successful that it was the tail wagging the dog. And they weren't giving anything to the school. They were giving them just barely enough money to get by. They were housed in the same building as they still are.
Did you have to go up those, there's still those steps, the metal steps in the galleries where you can see up to the former classroom area. Was that where it was?
It was on the back side across, where the railroad tracks run through, dividing the museum from the school half of the, And there was a passageway. If you go through the art museum back to the very back stairway there's a door in the hallway. And in those days, there used to be a school guard sitting at that door. So nobody went down there except students. You had to show your ID to get in. And we'd go down those stairs, and most of the school was ground level or below. In fact, most of it was below, most of my classes anyway. One of the best things about that situation was that proximity of the museum to the school, because 5 minutes from any classroom, I could be in the middle of the museum looking at the real stuff. And that was, I mean, you can't imagine for me at that point how significant that was. I was just a sponge, and I would take an apple for lunch most days, and maybe a sandwich, bologna sandwich, that I'd make in the morning and take to school with me. And they'd eat they had a big cafeteria there, and that's what most of the students did, is bring their own lunches. I don't think they served anything in the cafeteria. It was just a place to gather to eat. I'd eat my apple, and then I'd take off for the museum, and I'd spend most of the hour of the lunch just walking around looking at things and exploring till I got to know everything in there pretty well, pretty thoroughly, I think, from having that advantage. Plus, going in every day, the only way to get in there was to go in the front door and all the way through the museum. So every day going into school and coming back from school, I had to go through the museum. So I could take different routes or maybe just see the same thing every day for days in a row until it kind of became part of my environment. The school itself, because it was so starved financially, didn't have a particularly vital faculty. Most of the faculty were people who had been students there 20 or 20 years before, say, and had been the top students. And so they used to award the students a year travel in Europe after their degree. And so most of the instructors I had were people who had done that, who had gone through that, had gone to Europe, come back, they got hired to teach when they got back, and they'd been there ever since. And they were good, and they were challenging and interesting, but I have to say I don't think they were the most inspirational teachers I ever had. They were just kind of, I think a lot of them, they were getting kind of tired, not all of them. There were a few distinguished ones that made a strong impression on me and encouraged me a lot in terms of thinking about what kind of teacher I might be or want to be when I got out. But it was all in all, it was a positive experience for me, and it was a timely one, I think, for what I needed, which was the exposure and the time also to do what I wanted to do and to kind of pursue my own thoughts.
What was your artwork like in graduate school?
I was largely impressed by the city itself. I lived on the near north side, and so most of the time I just walked to school and then walked different streets between all these big tall buildings, and I was really aware of space and the relationship of people to architecture. And so most of the paintings that I did were either very formal, geometric kind of representations of landscape kinds of space, or the relationship of small figures to large geometric spaces. And I think, thinking back, I was influenced by some of the Renaissance painters who particularly dealt with spatial issues like that when they were first discovering perspective and had these settings of figures against geometry and they did some just kind of straight, almost expressionistic, figurative kinds of things. They were never quite. Again, I wasn't even at that point. I wasn't too knowledgeable about some of the contemporary things that were going on around me. I mean, all the way back to high school, I knew of Jackson Pollock, for example. It had only been 5 years or so before. But I'd never seen a Jackson Pollock. I just had a friend in Amarillo who, an older friend that worked in a store I worked in that was a wannabe painter, and he wanted to emulate Jackson Pollock. And I'd go over to his house, and he'd have a canvas spread out on his driveway, and he'd be out there splashing paint around, and I'm watching all this seriousness going on and trying to figure out, well, what's that about? What is this painting about? And so by the time I got the Art Institute, I still had seen very little, at least contemporary art, a lot of modern art there, of course. And I think it was more, I was influenced more by Matisse and Picasso than anybody else, as far as models go. Fragonard, is that what I want to say? Yeah, I won't say it.
Fragonard?
Could be. I'm trying to remember. No, it wasn't Fragonard. I'm sorry. My mental senility here is creeping in. No, the Renaissance painters and funny, I can't even, that's the name, not the name I want, but what I want's not coming. So. When I graduated, when I was graduated, as my English teacher would say, I had to find a job because by then I was married. And so I did the typical thing. I made up resumes, and I sent resumes all over the country applying. And got a number of interviews lined up. And set out, there was one particular week or 2 week period where I had a whole series of interviews lined up here in the Midwest, generally between Chicago and Kansas and North Dakota and a general kind of realm. And I set out, my wife and I set out on a road trip to go around to these schools to make the interviews. And one of the first places I came was to Normal, because there was a professor here named James Wozniak who taught ceramics primarily. Metals, he was skilled kind of in all of the craft means, welding and stuff. And I'd worked with him as his assistant when he was at TCU. He had taught at TCU prior to this. And we found out that he was down here and that I was at Chicago. And so when I was graduating, he invited us to come down for the week, and he would take me in to introduce me to the chairman of the department and told me to bring my portfolio because they had been searching for some drawing and painting people, and he might be interested in what I was doing. And so I took a whole portfolio of life drawings that I had done, which were the easiest thing to bring and probably the best examples of what I had to show him anyway, that I thought would appeal to him. Got down here and went through a meeting with him, showed him all, and he seemed to be really impressed with my work. And but he had to explain. He said, we had an opening but I'm sorry, we just filled it with some guy from Kansas named Harold Boyd, which of course didn't mean anything to me then. But it was a good interview. It was a good training. First interview was a good experience for me. Then we had an interview. Then, while we were here, somebody said, "Why don't you call up Western Illinois, because I think they're hiring too. I think they have some positions open." This was at 1965 when schools were really starting to boom and grow. And there was a lot of hiring going all over the country, and so I was very fortunate in that regard. Got to Macomb, interviewed there, and they didn't even have a dean. The acting dean interviewed me because there wasn't anybody in the department to interview me, I suppose. They'd just gotten a new art director that year, and he wasn't there yet, and the old one was long gone. And anyway, I got an interview with this dean, and he didn't know anything about art, but he looked at my grades and he said, "That looks pretty good, you know." And so they made me an offer there. Then we continued on to East Kansas, and I got there and was really excited, or they were really excited, because they were looking for somebody that was adept at painting and drawing and skill, but they wanted somebody to teach design and art appreciation or something, and things I wasn't interested in at all. I mean, I really wanted to teach painting and drawing. Anyway, they gave me the kind of fraternity rush, locked me in a closet until I said yes, and I never gave in. I told them I had an offer from Macomb, and it was to teach drawing and painting, and even though the Kansas job was much better money-wise, I just couldn't see going there to do that. And it seemed kind of apparent to me too, they also had a kind of pecking order where the people at the top, the people who did the longest, ran everything, and everybody else was just a peon. And I was convinced that that was not going to be a pleasant situation, no matter how much they thought they liked me. Then we went on up to North Dakota to, northern Iowa, to be interviewed there. And I had a good interview. I was impressed that they had a really significant art collection that they were proud of and supported and everything, but they made it clear that they weren't really interested in me because I didn't have any experience, and they really wanted somebody who would come in and be the head guy and take charge of the art department and put it on the map. They wanted to be yep.
So Northern Iowa wanted someone to put them on the map.
Yeah, and they liked what I had and everything, but they weren't convinced that I was the person to do that, since I'd never taught a day in my life. So I came back here, and I called up Western, and I told them I'd accept their offer. The very next day, I got a call from East Texas University asking me, they wanted to hire me without even interviewing me, which made me a little wary to start with, but they were going to pay me a whole lot more than Macomb was. But I told them no, I'd already committed to Macomb. I was going to go there, and it was settled. So that's where I ended up. I ended up in a department over there, which, as I said, had a brand new chairman. They had only had 2 other returning members of the art department. Everybody else had left. They had, that summer, had hired 7 new faculty members, one of them being the chairman of the department. Everybody else was a brand new, right out of school MFA. So, and we were from all over. We were from Wisconsin and Iowa. And places like that. So we kind of came in as the young guns. It's almost like we came in and 7 out of us, out of 11 faculty members, we kind of ran the place just by default. And it was pretty exciting, pretty heady, because for the most part, we were teaching what we did, teaching what we were prepared to do. But it wasn't necessarily that for everyone. But we were friends enough and close enough that we ended up rotating the choice classes so that everybody got to teach them, and on a rotating basis. And that was valuable in that everybody had to end up teaching something they didn't really know anything about, as well as everyone getting to teach what they wanted to teach. And so it was a pretty energetic department, and we were all stimulated and very competitive. And it was started out the first 2 or 3 years, it was really good. We continued to grow though and add people, and by the time we got into that 4th year, it was starting to turn into a bloody war, because there were so much competitiveness, so much competition, that people began to turn against each other, and faculty meetings were like riots and very unpleasant. And so people started to leave then, and I was still there. I hadn't really looked for anything else, but one day in the spring, just before the school ended, I got a call from someone here at ISU that remembered me from 4 years earlier and said, "We've got a drawing and painting position open. Are you still interested in it?" And I was so ready to get out of Macomb and get. I mean, it is the heart of Fort Gatonia, as everybody in Illinois knows. It was like, you can't get anywhere from there, or it takes too long, or it was just not a enjoyable place to be outside of the school itself. Anyway, I came over here for an interview, and fortunately, they made me an offer, and I took the job, and it was a job teaching drawing and painting, which over there I'd kind of gotten not entirely out of, but like I say, I'd kind of, through sharing, I ended up doing a lot of things that I wasn't interested in so much. And so I came here in 1969. Started in the summer, because Macomb only pays you in acorns and beets and potatoes. And I needed the money, so we moved the family over here, and almost like a month later from the time they made me the offer. And I started teaching summer school right away.
How big was the art department at ISU then?
Then?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember numbers. I would say it's half the size it is now, though, although we're back to one of those kind of periods where they're struggling, I think, and having a hard time getting enrollment. It was big enough that they authorized the new art building, which was built that first year that I got here, first or second year. Things were growing. Attendance was increasing rapidly. They were adding faculty every year, to the point that I know it was 2, 3, maybe 4 years after I came that we had a position for a new painter, and I was the chairman of the hiring committee. And we searched and searched, and we went through this range of really talented people applying from all over the country for a job here, and came down to there were 2 people that the art department was split about half the department wanted one, and half the department wanted the other, and we couldn't settle it. But because there were some other positions open in the department that they hadn't been able to fill, I was able to go to the chairman and say, look, give us both these positions so we can hire both these guys because we can justify it. We got room for them. And somebody else can have our turn next year then. And managed to swap them out and got that approved and got both of them hired. And they both turned out to be outstanding members of the department, Ron Jackson and Rodney Carswell, and who were dynamic painters, really good teachers.
You've had quite a lot of shows and museum shows and gallery representation. How has that experience been?
I would say positive, totally. It's been a great experience to have had them. I'm flattered that it was easier than it probably looks, because some of them were things that I pursued, I sought. Some of them I just fell into, kind of maybe not even knowing why. But it has allowed me to show my work pretty much all over the country, more Midwest to West and East. But the shows, pursuing them, whether they're ones that I sought or whether ones that just came along and happened, have all been very positive influences, I think, on my work in terms of the feedback that comes from that and the experience of doing that. And it was a good time for that because, again, I don't know that there are all that many opportunities today, or it's maybe just, it seems like it's a lot harder for people who are working here and teaching now and everything to get things like that. When I was in Macomb, there were 3 other painters over there. Who the 4 of us kind of made up largely the painting drawing part of the art department, that got together. I guess there are actually only 3 by the time we did this. One of them had left, but the 3 of us got together and, just as a kind of lark, did a Made in Macomb show. And we planned this whole thing out of what we're going to do. We're going to do all these thematic works of art, sculptures and paintings. And so we each did a portrait of the president of the university, and we each did a monument to Macomb. And I can't remember all of the ideas we had, but we brainstormed it and worked on it. And we had a show in our gallery that got a lot of attention. Not all necessarily positive, but it stirred things up pretty good, and it was all fun. It was all just kind of a lark. And Don Baum, who's a notorious art teacher and promoter in Chicago, happened to see the show, and so he set us up for a show in Chicago, Made in Macomb show in Chicago, and that got written up in both of the Chicago, the Sun-Times and the Tribune. Art critics wrote articles about it, and so we got some attention to Chicago, and that was the first kind of outreach, you get out of Macomb kind of exposure that we had. We also had an initial kind of energetic response that started with George Irwin in Quincy, who's, as far as I know, multimillionaire, owned a paper company over there that he sold to a large paper company, and that was in Quincy. And he was he was a supporter of the arts. He had a collection that included major artists, modernist painters and sculptors. He funded the Quincy Symphony out of his own pocket, and because they couldn't afford a director, he acted as a director until one day the symphony went to him and said, "Okay, George, we need a real director now." And he relinquished that. He wrote books about Illinois architecture. He's still around, I understand. But he was well known across the state for his contributions to the arts. And when the National Arts Council was formed, a lot of states began to form state arts councils, and the one here in Illinois he was responsible for getting that started, getting it formed, and he, pardon me, he supported that. And he got the idea, 68, I think it was, of having an exhibit of Illinois artists that would be put together by the Arts Council and then circulated around the state to all of any public institution that would show it. And it was 24 artists that were selected, and they put together 4 distinct shows. Excuse me. So they could break it down into small shows that didn't have a space enough to show the whole thing. But if they had a museum that was big enough that they could put all 4 of them back together again as a big show. And it all opened in Quincy. He owned a bank over there, what had once been a bank, which he had converted into a gallery, the main room. It was quite large and very beautiful marble floors, and nothing spared to make it, the lights perfect and all that. And they had the big grand opening over there of all 6 traveling shows, or all, was it? I guess it was 4 shows of 6 apiece, 4 shows. Anyway, all at once, and all of the artists showed up, and he had prominent art critics and writers to come and give talks about it and tell us how wonderful we were, or not how wonderful we were. And we had a mix of both. Anyway, that got us some attention in Chicago, and it was largely because our being in that show. We had, I think, all 3 of us, 3 or 4, maybe 5 people from Macomb were in the show, which percentage-wise was huge, given that nobody knew who Macomb was, and it was because the atmosphere and attitude over there was so open. So when Don Baum came around to talk to people and consider what might be shown, we welcomed him in, open arms, treated him, pardoned him, and all this stuff. And he went to some other of the major schools in the state, and a couple I think of, but I don't think I'll mention, who gave him the cold shoulder, like, that's beneath us, didn't. He was turned off, so he really responded to what we had. And we had some really good people. It wasn't just the buttering up that helped. I think it was because we had some pretty solid work, I think. And anyway, we got included in that show, and that got a little traction in Chicago, especially, but around the state elsewhere. And then when I came here, those of us who were here, because we were close to Chicago, it was natural to go up there and to try to find outlets for our work, and there were new galleries springing up all the time, and so it wasn't that difficult to go up there and find somebody that was willing to represent you and show your work. And
So getting representation in Chicago.
Well, there was for a while there. Then we got all kinds of publicity in Chicago about ISU and the department, and because we were getting exposure there all the time, and so we were seen almost as a kind of group. There was somebody characterized us as the Bloomington group, and so there were 2 or 3 different galleries there that were showing various artists from here, and we had a certain kind of notoriety, reputation up there of quality outside of the city, which up until that point, most Chicagoans were hesitate to even admit that there was any art going on outside the city in Chicago. And so that stimulated a flurry of activity up there for a few years until that kind of began to die out.
Good. All right. So,
Right. Yep.
So you've had, boy, I am just not happy with that. So we've talked about teaching, we've talked about growing up in Texas and showing Chicago in school, and the Lewis and Clark series. What other things would you like to touch on?
I don't know. I feel blessed in the life that I've had, because it seems like as much work as it is, in the long run, it seems like I've really had it easy. And I've been blessed with good friends, good support all along. I know from what I hear that there are many art departments and many places in the country that it's very difficult to be an artist because you're fighting everybody all the time. I never really, outside of the last year, I would say at Macomb, I've never really been through that. That despite whatever disagreements we may have ever had here at ISU, that it was all remained collegial and understanding, and I may be wrong. I could have a flood of people come in here and tell me, "You, what are you talking about? We hate your guts." But I feel like I've been in a place of great support. It's been a great place for me to be, mainly just because of the support and the freedom to work and opportunities to from here to get your work out to other places and get people to see your work and share. I find it difficult to talk about my artwork per se, because I don't feel compelled to explain it to anybody. It's just what I do. There was a quote this last summer in the Gauguin show in the Art Institute of Chicago that actually it was so important, I guess they used it several times in the text. But late in his life, he made a comment that I identified with. It explains, if for no one else, it explains to me, myself, what I've been doing. And the quote was something to the effect, I paraphrase, I never really made any great innovations or discoveries in my art, but I spent my life searching the corners of myself to just find things I didn't know, or words to that effect. And I think that explains my own motivations, my own rewards and successes, is that in the long run it has ended up just about being pursuing who I am, trying to understand myself, and being delighted to find or make discoveries every once in a while of new things that are there that I wasn't aware of. And so I continue to try to maintain that. I will confess that getting to my age and having some health problems and beginning to think about what I have done and what I'm going to do with it, and am I going to keep continuing it, that there's some hesitancy and acknowledging that it really was worthwhile. What am I going to do with all these things that nobody wants? For my material, pragmatic things like that, you know, what am I going to do with this accumulation that I have? But on balance, I'm still motivated to make more, and I feel a little guilty about that, because it's like I recognize on one hand that it's going to be a problem. On the other hand, that's the very thing that's kind of driven me to do what I do and pursue what I've done over the years, and to make new discoveries, find out new things all the time about myself in the process.
Mm-hmm. I thought there's a Raphael Sawyer quote where he talks about self-revealments, and that's always been being an artist gives you access to make those discoveries.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what it was. There was a quote yesterday I heard. It was like that. It's like, they weren't talking about art. They were talking about, what was that? I think he's talking about poetry. Because we could probably edit this out of the whole thing. He was saying something to the effect that in the end it was not knowing where you were going and the discoveries that you make in the process that really became the reward. And for me, it's not immediate. I mean, I could do something because I want to do it, and I can question it at the same time and say, why did I do that? And maybe 10 years later, I look at it and say, oh, now I understand what that was about and why I was doing that, or what it relates to that I was totally ignorant of at the time. To me, that defines art, I guess. That it's really, first of all, about the artist and about what you explore and what you discover and what it means to you, and then to the degree that that is shared by people that come to it. Provides the outlines of what we're all about.
Nice. In no place in this interview have I really had you introduce yourself. So maybe if you just say that you're, Ken Holder, and that you're an artist here in McLean County or in Bloomington or wherever you'd like to say.
My name is Kenneth Holder. I'm mostly known as Ken Holder, though, but I'll answer to anything. As my mother used to say, call me anything you want, just call me for supper. I've been in Bloomington since 1969. That's hard to believe. I've been retired almost half of that time. That's even harder to believe. well, it's not quite accurate, but in my head, it's part of the identity I carry around with me, I guess. I taught drawing and painting for 30 years at Illinois State, as well as being the director of the graduate program for, what was it, 2 or 3 or 4 years. Have tried to be an active member of the community. I appreciate the community that is here. I always said it was one of the best places in the country to raise your kids because of the kind of sanity that we McLean County people pretend to have. And because of the proximity, you have access to several major cities, Chicago, St. Louis, going west to Peoria and Omaha, and going east to Indianapolis and Cincinnati. You're within a day's drive of a number of major cities. We're in a railway crossroads where you can go northeast, south, and west. We have an international airport, or I guess it's exactly international, but we're, again, just one step away from being anywhere in the world, or 2 steps away to being anywhere in the world, anytime we want to go. And it's just a very comfortable place to be. And I've never been one to think that art comes out of not that art can't come out of pain, but that's a necessity. And I've always thought that I've been one of those who believes that comfort is more supportive of artistic endeavors. And it's the uncomfortable things that sometimes may provide the edge, but being comfortable in your own skin and in your own community and in your own cultural group is a lot more meaningful in terms of a supportive situation. And this has been that kind of place for me. And